fascinating. I'm a doctor, not a mechanic.
Thank you, love you. Mwah.
Most illogical.
Aye, sir.
Well, that was different. Yep, lousy, but different.
Places, please. And here we go.
Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, bears, ecosians, and things, to episode 116 of MuppeTrek Podcast. I can never say that correctly, of the MuppeTrek Podcast. I'm Jarman.
And I'm Steve. And don't worry, we have a long time to practice it.
That's right.
You know why? Because we're here to compare, confer, and contrast about our two favorite franchises. Jarman, what are those?
Those are, of course, the Muppets and Star Trek. We do one-to-one reviews of the Muppet Show and Star Trek The Next Generation now.
And this week we have The Muppet Show with very special guest star Marty Feldman and Next Generation episode Angel One.
Ooh. And we have no feedback this week, so I'm going to jump to you, Steve, and ask, who the heck is this Marty Feldman guy?
Well, from what I can gather to our UK listeners, he's kind of a comedy legend. He got his start on British radio and early television. He was often found palling around besides members of the Monty Python crew, and even had his own TV show a few times, including the Marty Feldman Comedy Machine. And he eventually won 2 British Academy Television Awards. But what does our U.S. listeners probably know him from? Well, he's most known for playing Igor in Mel Brooks' Young Frankenstein.
So well.
Very iconic role in an incredibly iconic movie.
Yeah, he was fantastic in that.
But what's he up to this week on The Muppet Show? Well, backstage, Fozzie struggles with the fact that there aren't really any roles for him in the show that week. Gonzo jumps at his chance to get on stage. Sam is outraged as usual. He finds out they finally have a respectable British guest, and then it turns out it's Marty Feldman, and he is less than thrilled. On stage, Kermit introduces Marty Feldman and the theme of the night, Arabian Nights. We find ourselves in a grand palace. A sultan, that is the Swedish chef, likes bedtime stories and cutting off heads. And he meets the new Princess Scheherazade, played by Marty Feldman in a ridiculous outfit. He offers her a bedtime. Marty Feldman playing Princess offers Swedish chef Sultan a bedtime story. Man, that got confusing really quick. Shahara Marty, we'll just call Shahara Marty, tells the story of Sinbad. We cut to Kermit as Sinbad and his frog adventurers. They confront an evil genie guarding a treasure. The story is interrupted when Marty starts drinking ketchup. It's real weird. Sinbad passes himself off not as Sinbad the sailor, but he's Sinbad the surfer. And we get Surfin' USA with some frogs. They escape the angry genie. Marty leaves the stage and then comes back to find out that the Sultan still isn't happy. He begins another story, and this time it's a story of Aladdin and the Magic Lamp. Gonzo is the titular Aladdin. He rubs the lamp. Eventually, Marty comes out in a puff of smoke, appears as a genie, pops out, and another puff of smoke. Fozzie is suddenly there with a punchline, and then Marty sends him away with another explosion, puff of smoke. Gonzo wishes for dancing girls, but real weird dancing girls, and out comes a cavalcade of chickens. Other dancers come out, and there's like a Benny Hill style off like comedy bit that happens. It's also weird. We then find ourselves in a cityscape. A man sings about meeting an enchanting woman, but she already belongs to a whirling dervish. Marty rushes back on stage from somewhere and into the palace. He tells the story of the Wright brothers of Kitty Hawk. Sam the Eagle is there. He reads the script verbatim. Orville and Wilbur Wright are both played by Marty Feldman.
As one guy.
He presents a confusing invention, which is a little airplane that he claims really makes phone calls. A police officer shows up, brandishing a telephone, answers it, and then is shot in the head. More police show up, and we finally get a performance of The Laughing Policeman. Most of the lyrics are ha. Marty is in front of the Sultan once more. He has saved his best story for last, of course, Ali Baba and the 4 thieves. For budget reasons, but then one of them calls out, so it's only three thieves. We get the story of Ali Baba. We get Marty Feldman, but as a puppet, leading a horse. Out of the forest comes the 3, not thieves, but the 3 bears, led by Fozzie. There's a costume change into 1940s gangsters. They go back to their cave of riches. Goldilocks shows up, looking for the bears. Fozzie comes back out and leads the finale. Hot time in the old town tonight. Fozzie thinks it isn't big enough, so suddenly the Sesame Street gang shows up and joins for the last bit. Kermit thanks Marty one last time. Marty got to meet his favorite Muppet, Cookie Monster, because they have matching eyes. More
Googly
Muppets join that all have googly eyes also. And that is what we call the Muppet Show. So, Jarman, what did you think of this week's episode with Marty Feldman?
Oh, did you do the backstage plot?
I covered it.
Oh, I guess there wasn't
much of it.
You're right.
That was like the first two things. Like Fozzie was bummed out he couldn't be in the show, and then there was that thing with Sam. There was like one other small thing I don't think I wrote.
You're
down
right. You covered all
kind
of
of inconsequential.
So, this was one of the episodes on Disney Plus. You'll see has the warning beforehand because of the culturally insensitive material. Mostly, the Arabian Nights played by all white people. But aside from that, I very much enjoyed this episode. Actually, I think Marty Feldman is basically an irreverent British Muppet himself, so he fit right in. If not, he made things a little more risque than usual. His jokes are right in the edge of like beyond a family show.
Yes, that is true.
Which was kind of fun. And he played tons of characters. He was really silly. He even sang a little bit, and he was great with the Muppets. And we got to see Sesame Street characters, which is pretty cool. And I love how they made a Marty Feldman Muppet as well, which is hilarious.
We haven't seen that since like season 1.
Oh, that was a real puppet before?
No. I'm saying that in season 1, for a little while, they were trying to make a puppet for every guest, and they clearly gave up on it.
I'm not surprised. Yeah, I forgot about that. So even without our usual Muppet segments, I think a lot of the Muppets got to take part as different characters. I think the Swedish Chef as the Caliph was probably the best. He was just ridiculous. And I love Marty Feldman like misinterpreting what he's saying and stuff. One big question I had was, where is Miss Piggy again? She probably could have been great in this episode, just missing in action. No Miss Piggy.
True. Now, mind you, Frank Oz, I think, was in there because I think he did the voice of the Marty Feldman puppet.
Right. I was thinking, like, was he sick or something? But he was there. So that's strange.
Maybe Miss Piggy, they're trying to let her cool a little bit, or who knows?
But I really like these episodes that have themes to them. Like we're noticing more of these in this season that are kind of like the movies where it's all one story, the Alice in Wonderland, and then now Arabian Nights. And so even though it's a departure, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was chaotic and crazy and fun. And So what'd you think, Steve?
So some things I really enjoyed. I agree that the comedy was much faster and more up to the edge on this episode than most others.
Mm-hmm.
And Marty had the energy and charisma to pull it off, which is not something all the hosts would have to do.
That's true.
I did like the theming, and we have seen, while there was the cultural insensitivity warning at the beginning, not say I feel like it was justified, but they did Arabian Nights. They picked a theme, they went with it, they used established visuals for it. And you can say bunch of white people, but it's a frog and a bear and a chicken and things. So I kind of, besides Marty Feldman, I kind of reject your premise about the white people.
Well, and also
which is what you said.
The good thing is also that they didn't do a lot of things that were just cultural stereotypes.
No,
they did more of storytelling and less cultural stereotypes.
Even the whirling dervish thing was pretty clean and not crazy.
Well, I can't remember where whirling dervishes are from, but they did mention India in one of the sketches, and that's nothing to do with Arabian Nights because India is a whole separate country. And
yeah.
So I mean, they mix some of that stuff, with kind of like cultural ignorance back then, which is kind of that's the insensitivity part of it. But I don't think there wasn't anything directly.
But there have been other times where I've felt more like
uncomfortable, yeah, exactly,
about what's happening than this episode, which at least had a theme.
Right, it had a story it was telling.
It had a story.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
However, specifically the sketch with Sam the Eagle, and a little bit the sketch with Gonzo almost fell into that Spike Milligan category of like so British that it doesn't work. At least maybe not for US audiences.
The kind of humor you mean?
Yeah, the quick non sequiturs and the ridiculousness of he has an airplane that's really a telephone and the telephone is really a gun.
Yeah,
that was weird and fast, and it felt, as I said, like it felt like that Spike Milligan line where it was
think
too weird and non sequitur to be funny to me.
what worked for me is that it was Marty Feldman delivering it better than Spike Milligan did, I think. And so it immediately did feel Monty Python-esque.
Spike Milligan, spoke at like 1,000 miles per hour and mumbled a lot of it. So you couldn't even understand things. You're absolutely right about that.
Whereas Marty Feldman delivered it better, and so it felt Monty Python-esque, especially like the Call Me Orville and Wright or whatever he's doing. Like those lines sounded, they were very play on words, Monty Python type of stuff.
My mom always wanted twins, identical twins.
That's why we look so similar, or something like that.
Yeah, that was it. So this probably will not fall top of the heap for me, but there are many episodes this is far better than.
Yeah, I thought this
just
was
from the theming and overall arching story alone.
Right. I thought this was fairly top of the heap for me. Probably not the top of the season, but it was pretty high up.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was well done.
All right. Well, music this week, Surfin' USA from the 1963 and the Beach Boys. The album this was from was the first one where they used double track vocals, which is what led the group to have the much fuller sound and harmonies that they became really, really known for that otherwise weren't possible for the group to sing. In a Persian Market, it's from 1920s by Albert Kettleby. It was originally categorized as an educational novelty song for piano. Girlfriend of a Whirling Dervish by Allen and Dubin. It was released in 1938. There was not a ton more interesting information on this one at all. The Laughing Policeman, it was a music hall song from the early 1920s written by Charles Penrose. By 1933, it had sold 120,000 phonograph copies, which at the time made it like one of the most popular songs that existed.
Oh my gosh.
Hot Time in the Old Town Tonight by Metz and Hayden. This song was incredibly popular during the Spanish-American War. Enemy Spanish soldiers heard it so often in the field that there were reports that they believed it was the U.S. national anthem.
Oh, wow.
Hot Time in the Old Town Tonight, because it was just everywhere. Jordan, what did you think was the best Muppeteering moment in this episode?
So I know it was really quick, but it just really impressed me and stood out was the camel at the very beginning of the episode, because it was probably two guys in the suit, and they also had to figure out a smoke machine
for
the mouth, and like getting around the door, they had some trouble, and so like Marty like goes back and tries to open the door for them a little bit more, and so I was just like, that was a lot of work for a really small, tiny bit.
They probably sweat a lot.
Yeah, and I liked it. It was fun.
I'm just going to give it to the Sesame Street gang. They didn't do anything particularly great. It was just really exciting to see them.
And great how he introduced them. He's like, open sesame, and the door opens, and there they are.
And there was sesame. That was great. It was a great segue.
That's a good point.
So, John, what happened on this week's episode of Star Trek The Next Generation?
Well, this week we have Angel 1. So the Enterprise is headed to the planet Angel 1, which is ruled by an oligarchy of women because they're looking for survivors of a shipwrecked freighter called Odin, and they think it must have sent an escape pod here 7 years ago. So Riker, Data, Yar, and Troy are sent to the surface to talk to the leaders of the planet, and Troy is designated as the main speaker because it's a society ruled by women. And after talking about finding the survivors, all the Angel 1 leaders seem suspicious and guarded, and they eventually find out that's because the survivors from Odin, who are all men, they rebelled against the matriarchal society and wanted to change things, so they're now outlaws and outcasts. And meanwhile, back in the Enterprise, we learn that Starfleet is about to be in a standoff with Romulans by the neutral zone, and they could really use the Enterprise there as a show of force and support as soon as possible. So now we have our ticking clock of the episode. And also there's a virus that breaks out in the ship, which is never really explained how exactly it got there in the first place, but the crew members start dropping like flies in the hundreds with these flu-like symptoms on the ship. And meanwhile, we have on Angel 1, their leader Beata, I think it was pronounced, or Beata, I don't know,
Beata.
meets up with Riker to privately discuss the situation, and then they get it on. Oh yeah, Kirk style. They eventually convince Beata and the other leaders to let them take the fugitive survivors off their planet, and the Enterprise tracks them down with their sensors. But when Data, Yar, and Troy get to them, their leader Ramsey says that they don't want to leave because they've been here for 7 years and this is their home now. And they can't force them to leave because they're not actually Starfleet. They were just a citizen vessel, basically. So they beam back to the capital, and it's revealed that one of Beata's inner circle, named Ariel, was actually in a relationship with Ramsey, and she's hiding that fact from Beata as we see her in the cave with him after they leave. But it turns out that Beata had Ramsey's girlfriend Ariel followed to where she was hiding out. So Beata has them all arrested and brought to the Capitol. And she says they'll all be executed. But Riker offers to Ramsey that he can just beam all his people out and take them on board the Enterprise. But Ramsey still refuses to go. He wants to be with his people, his wife. And meanwhile, the sickness on the Enterprise has become much worse. So Dr. Crusher says no one can come aboard the Enterprise anyways. So that creates more problems. But Data can come up because he's an android and he can't catch the sickness. So he now has to take over the ship while Dr. Crusher keeps looking for a cure. So Ramsey is about to be executed, but Riker gives one last wonderful monologue trying to convince Beata to set them free, saying that this is just how things are changing on her planet. She has to come to terms with that, and that killing Ramsey and his people would just make things worse for her by making them all martyrs. So Beata is eventually convinced and lets Ramsey and his people just be exiled instead. Dr. Crusher finds a cure for the virus, and the away team comes back up, and they head off for the Romulan neutral zone. That is Angel 1. I skipped some things in there, but they're smaller details that weren't really part of the plot. So, Steve, what'd you think?
All right. So, some things I liked. Even though the plot was thick, I liked that everything had a reason for being there.
Mm-hmm.
Like if they hadn't investigated what happened to the ship because it was right on the Romulan border. The survivors hadn't signaled because they were happy and or in hiding. The Enterprise can't zap them out because of the disease. I just like that everything had a reason why they were in this kind of tight situation.
Right.
That sort of also worked against it. It also forced a timeline on Riker, which was nice to feel that mounting tension. And I read some reviews of this, and this episode did not come off nearly as sexist as a lot of the reviews kind of led me to believe.
I thought the same thing, and we'll talk about that more, but like, maybe as a guy, I don't know, but it seemed like it was kind of the opposite of that in a lot of ways, but
kind of.
It was,
yeah, we'll talk about it more.
Yeah.
I loved that finally the Prime Directive has like limits, that they weren't a starship, so it doesn't apply to them. And therefore they can't do anything. I was like, oh, okay, cool. Prime Directive finally gets you to leave someone alone. All right. It's just humans this time. So I guess that's why you're following it. And I did like the reveal of Beata's right hand, or like the other in command being married to one of the survivors, and then working it into like conflict with the government and more intrigue. And that was just an interesting angle that I kind of wasn't expecting.
Yeah.
Like it even spelled out like some of the men have families and children. I didn't even think like that's what they were going to utilize. So, even that was a nice surprise.
Mm-hmm.
Some things I struggled with. It felt like there were one too many ingredients in this soup.
Right.
And even the script calls it out. You've got the survivors, and then you've got the Romulans. I think they're pre-warp civilization. I think the disease, the countdown till everyone's dead. And I said, even the script knew it. At one point, Geordi was on the bridge talking to the doctor when everyone is sick and warns the doctor that if she doesn't fix everyone, there won't be anyone to be at the battle stations when the Romulan comes. And she literally just says, if the disease isn't contained, there won't be anyone left to care.
Right.
Pointing out that the existing stakes of the Romulans literally mean nothing.
Like they could have done without the Romulan stakes.
They pointed out that it meant nothing.
It was one too many stakes.
It was just one too many stakes. That being said, the planet being close to the neutral zone was the reason that they weren't able to investigate. So maybe it had to be there.
Yeah, I could see that.
But it felt like one too many things.
Yeah.
So those overall, not as bad of an episode as a lot of the reviewers kind of led me to believe. It's certainly probably not going to end up as one of my favorites, though.
I think I was trying to find because after I went back and I saw I'm doing trivia in a bit, but we'll talk about some of the things that are said about it being so sexist. And I was like, well, there is something I did notice, that there was a similar episode we watched of the animated series. It was called The Lorelei Signal.
Yeah.
And it's where the men who went down to this planet that were ruled by women, they would age quickly and weaken around the women. So all of a sudden they had to beam down just a female away team to take care of things. And it put Uhura in charge. She had a great episode, one of her best episodes of any of the series she was on. And here they had a chance to do that. They almost did, having Yar and Troy there. But then all of a sudden, Yar and Troy, halfway through the episode, become completely unimportant. It's all about Riker. Riker saves the day with the monologue. And so I was like, that's the only part I really thought was bad, where he basically was the driving force now. It's like, so they didn't really learn their lesson that they could have been teaching with this lesson of this episode of having the women be just as important and really
like there should have been, you're absolutely right. There should have been way more of Riker. And there was you're amusingly enough in the original series, a crazy lack of this, like Riker doing doctor stuff and like investigating, figuring out what happened. So much of the episode was just her reporting how many people were sick.
Yeah, that's true.
And I was thinking about in the original series, Bones suffered from the same thing.
Where he only got to say how many people were sick or whatever, that kind of thing.
Yeah. It was like a check-in on stuff. But that being said, even he got his episodes where he figured out something. Mind you, most of the time it was really Spock. But sometimes Bone figured things out.
Yeah, sometimes. And they started off strong with Troy being like in charge, and she was like having to do all the negotiations. They should have continued that. And Yar being a strong female, like the security officer, she could have done a lot with that. But instead, it was just like, I'm Riker. I'm going to go sleep with their leader and do the monologue. And it's like, what? So, but otherwise, like, I think they made good points. He kept talking about equality and saying how, like, on our planet, we don't do this anymore. We equally share the responsibilities and the pleasure. And I was like, that's a good line. Like, but then, so I didn't really see so much of the sexism in this episode people talk about all the time. It's just, it's odd. I don't know. Maybe I'm missing it. I don't know.
I mean, maybe people were just mad because men were being treated as secondary and they got mad about that.
But women are upset about this episode. So I don't know. It's unusual,
I guess. And this isn't even the first episode we've seen like that. The one with, was it like the second episode where Tasha Yar had to battle a woman on a gymnasium?
That one was sexist. That one was pretty bad.
Right. But like, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like that one is way worse than
way worse.
But it was the same premise where like the women were the holder of the lands and the holder of the power ultimately.
Yeah. And like I otherwise enjoyed this episode, but I thought it was a little convoluted at times. But it was, but I thought it was, it was an interesting plot, and it was something I was looking for. And I loved Picard being sick. We didn't mention that. He was just so funny, being deathly ill, and Worf doing warrior sneezes. It was hilarious. And you get Geordi taking over the ship, which was cool. And a little moment with him and Worf, and Worf's telling him like, you don't have to do everything yourself. You can delineate tasks now. So yeah, I didn't think it was that bad. It was not a great episode, but it wasn't bad. I don't know. That's where I'm at. But trivia for this episode, this marks the first mention of the Romulans in The Next Generation, which I didn't really realize, but there you go.
Really?
Yeah, I guess they haven't, because it was all Ferengi crap up to the now.
Yeah, you're right. The Ferengi were introduced early and often.
Yeah. This is the first Star Trek episode to have the Prime Directive in its modern incarnation, which Stephen kind of noticed. While it had been mentioned a few times previously in the series, the writers had been working by the version from the original Star Trek, which only applied to pre-warp civilizations. And with this story, Gene Roddenberry rewrote the Prime Directive into a doctrine of total non-interference with the affairs of other species, irrespective of technology level. So he made a more complex and longer definition of what the Prime Directive would be. In the original story, Beata was named Victoria, and she imprisoned Riker after he directly addressed her and then touched her hand. Tasha Yar stunned Riker to prevent him from being killed, and then took over command of the away team. And in this version, Captain Picard was the only person aboard the Enterprise D who was affected by the virus. The male slaves then started a rebellion on the planet led by Lucas Jones, who was killed. I think Lucas Jones was supposed to be the Ramsey of this episode. And I like that episode too. That sounds pretty good. Patrick Stewart had previously given the writers and producers his disagreements with elements of other episodes, which led to Gates McFadden, our Dr. Crusher, to think she was also welcome to do the same. And when she complained that the episode struck her as sexist, the writers waited until the end of the season when Gene Roddenberry left the show and appointed a new showrunner to declare that they would quit the show unless Gates McFadden was fired. So they were so angry that she had notes for them on this episode, because she always saw Patrick Stewart giving notes, that they said they're all going to quit unless they fire Gates McFadden. So as a result, she was written off the show for the second season, which will be coming up. Is she really
gone?
Not gone, but she does get kicked off for a little bit because of this crap. So these writers eventually were kind of phased out, and then she was able to come back, basically.
Oh, good. I'm glad they fixed that crap.
Yeah. Some of the production crew subsequently thought poorly of this episode. Executive producer Maurice Hurley described it as terrible, just terrible, one of the ones you just as soon see erased. Producer Herbert Wright felt that the sexual places it was dragged to were absurd. He didn't need to sleep with the leader of the planet. I don't think there's anything crazier than that sexually wise. Gates McFadden.
Well, no, but even that I take issue with, because we think of like a male-dominated society where men in power use their position as leverage over women.
Yeah.
It happens all the time. It has happened all the time.
And she was doing that to him.
So the idea of a world leader seeing a guy she wanted and go like, oh, he's nice, you should come to my room tonight. Like, why are we pretending that's not what happens with dudes all the time?
And she said things to him that people
like
said,
all of history for that matter.
Yeah, that men say to women all the time, these like kind of skeezy pickup lines and stuff. She was doing all that to him. I thought that was the whole point of the thing, was showing the reverse, like how men are gross like this, and she's kind of doing the same thing. I don't get it. I don't understand. But maybe we're both men, so maybe a woman could watch this and give us their perspective.
Yeah, maybe someone can write and give us some perspective, because I just don't. I don't know. I think that this episode spelled out exactly what it needed to spell out. Like, the allegory was very clear.
Like, this is a bad thing, not a good thing. Like,
yeah, this is not characterized as a good thing.
Yeah,
that's the other thing. So yeah, no, so just of all the reviews I read, it just didn't end up being as bad as I think a lot of them painted it.
I agree. And the last little bit here, Gates McFadden described this as one of the most sexist episodes we ever had, and she was in that other one.
Watch it, maybe I missed it or wasn't paying close enough attention.
I watched it for an episode.
Give it benefit of the doubt.
And Patrick Stewart sought to have the episode changed to reduce those elements, but maybe there was more in the original script. But still, it's like that one.
That's true.
The one we talked about before, I can forget the name of now, with the warrior
code thing,
the code of honor. Yeah, that one was so much more sexist than this episode. So
that was code of honor. Hey, we got there.
Exactly. But anyway, Steve, what are our Trek Connection Muppet connections this time?
Oh boy, I've got a bunch. All right. Marty Feldman was in Young Frankenstein with Terry Garr, who was in the original series episode Assignment Earth that was supposed to be the spinoff at the end of season 2. Bam. Marty Feldman was also in the last remake of Bo Jess. That was the name of the movie. In addition, it did have a few other Muppet Show alumni, including Peter Ustinov and Avery Schreiber. But in this movie was also Ted Cassidy, better known as the actor who played Lurch, who was in the original series episode The Corbomite Maneuver.
Yes.
And he's also the guy who was in the Gorn suit in season 1.
I didn't know that. Oh.
Tranya! So there was the show The Marty Feldman Comedy Machine, featured 3 different episode appearances from Orson Welles.
Mm-hmm.
Orson Welles also provided the narration for the teaser trailer and television advertisements for Star Trek The Motion Picture. Okay, so then in this episode, the actress Karen Montgomery, who played Beta, her first role was in an episode of Kojak featuring Telly Savalas, who made a cameo at the El Sleazo Cafe in the Muppet movie. Karen Montgomery was also in the movie Amazon Women on the Moon. Also in this movie was Arsenio Hall, and the Arsenio Hall show was the last Jim Henson television interview that occurred, and also where he introduced Kevin Clash as Clifford to the world.
Oh,
bam!
So many connections.
Also, huge chunk of Amazon Women on the Moon, directed by Joe Dante, director of Gremlins, one of my favorite movies. Lots going on here.
Which also has puppets in it.
It's all connected.
And it's all connected because these are the same episode, basically. Yeah, both episodes play with gender roles. We have the matriarchal society in Star Trek and Marty Feldman in drag.
I guess I kind of edged around that, and then both feature questionable cultural outfits. The men's outfits on Angel 1 and the Middle Eastern gear in the Muppet Show.
That's true. We got Riker nipple in this episode.
We did get Riker nipple.
Both episodes have characters being detained by authorities but then let go because of a performance. Marty Feldman as the Wright brothers, detained by police in the patent office, but quickly makes friends with them as they sing a song together. So they let him go, basically. And Ramsey and his people are about to be executed by the Angel 1 authorities, but they're released after Riker's monologue performance.
Both people feature people changing their identities. The survivors blending in and assimilating to be on Agent One, sort of. They were really rebels, but they all took families and stuff. And Sinbad passing himself off as a surfer instead of a sailor.
Oh. Both have someone hiding in a cave. The Sesame Street gang on the Muppet Show during the Alibaba and Three Thieves scene, and Ariel hiding in Ramsey's cave while the away team was interrogating him on Star Trek.
I love that.
That's true. Oh, God.
Transporter malfunction. Transporter malfunction.
All right, it's a part of the show where we transport one character from one episode into the other and vice versa. So what you got for us, Steve?
Trek to Muppets this week, I'm going to bring over the mysterious illness, slowly wiping out more and more of the Muppet Show cast, forcing them to call in ringers. And finally, the Sesame Street gang shows up and finishes the show because everyone else is dying.
They actually have something to do at that point then.
Yeah, it's part of the plot then.
Trek to Muppets, I'd have Riker in his Angel One outfit to come over to replace the Swedish chef.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
He'd be a great king laying in his bed with his 1,000 wives, just laying there with his nipple hanging out.
Also, he could replace Marty Feldman pretty easy too.
That's true. That's true.
Muppets to Trek, bring over Marty Feldman and replace Riker. I just think of him in that princess outfit trying to entice the Angel One elected one while doing nothing but gags.
Hello. Muppets of Star Trek, I'd have Marty Feldman come over to replace Beata. It would be hilarious having him making out with Riker and everyone calling him beautiful, looking like he did in this episode.
Yeah.
So pretty much the same thing, but in reverse. And that brings us to the end of episode 116 of the MuppeTrek Podcast.
Join us next time for the Muppet Show with guest Chris Langham.
And the Next Generation episode 11001001.
So from the lovers, the dreamers, and us.
Live long and prosper, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the MuppeTrek Podcast. Be sure to follow us on social media on Facebook and Twitter.
Subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform.
This podcast has been brought to you by A Play on Nerds.